know what Mormons say about people who leave the church.
The world does not revolve around you, and adulthood will slap you upside the head repeatedly until you learn that lesson.
People are infamously underprepared for the temple.
So he snorted 2 lines of cocaine, he grabbed a gun, he loaded it, and he said a prayer.
She had just been called and notified that her son had passed away.
I don't want to be the correlation causation guy here, but I'll just leave it at that. All right, welcome to Salty Saints. I'm Hayden Holm, and I'm here with my brother, Tanner. And we're going to be kicking things off today by starting off with some cultural complaints. This is basically a time where we point out something that we don't like about the culture of the church. And before we get into this, being our pilot episode, the first thing I want to make abundantly clear is the difference between complaining and murmuring. So, did you know that Captain Moroni complained, and Lemuel, they murmured? Okay, now the difference, there's a big difference. So Captain Moroni, he complained about Pahoran. He saw an issue, he complained about it, and then that issue was taken care of, right? So it's like complaining with a purpose. Laman and Lemuel, they just complained for the sake of complaining. Like, they murmured, they just kind of whined. So I just want to make it clear, like, this isn't just whining and gnashing my teeth. This is actually just trying to complain about the culture, not the brethren, not the structure of the church or anything like that. The culture of the church.
I don't know if you've ever read the classic Peter Pan, but the actual book, there's a phrase that Lost Boys use all the time when they're talking about each other. They say, "I complain of this person," right? Like, I complain of Sam, and then they start telling what's bugging them, right? So that was Moroni. That's what he was doing. He was complaining of something, right?
That's right.
To bring it to notice, to report it, which is very much different than murmuring. So I like that differentiation there. It's a good point.
Yeah, and I think there's almost a culture in the church of saying, like, you're not supposed to complain or anything like that. But it's like, no, from the text that I read, that's not the case. It's like, I think complaining is actually something that is doctrinally based. So I have no problem with it.
And now for a cultural call-out. We sure don't appreciate that.
The first cultural call-out that I want to bring out today is the culture around a mission call. So growing up in Utah, especially growing up as a member of the church, there is an icky, gross, nasty stereotype around a mission call. And that is the focus being put entirely on the location and not as much on actually receiving the call. And so I want to call that out because I think that is something that's super gross, and I think it's something that can actually set up a missionary to start his mission off on the wrong foot. So, like, for example, I know that, like, a lot of times people think, like, if you get called to serve in the United States, the culture of the church views that as, like, a lesser calling. They view it as, like, oh, you must have messed up or done something like that. And that's just not from my own thoughts. Like, that's from my own experience. I mean, our younger brother got called to the States. He had people tell him that. You know, my brother-in-law got called to the States. He had similar experiences. So there's this nasty element of the church that has somehow assigned worthiness with location. And I've had enough bad missionary companions on my mission outside of the country to know that is absolutely not the case.
Oh yeah, well, I think it's hilarious. I remember I got called to serve in Canada, the Montreal mission.
Yeah,
and I remember telling certain people, and there was like it wasn't in the States, and there were some people who told me that. Well, at least it's not in the States, you know, even though it's right next door. And there were some people that, like, they were somewhat crestfallen when I told them, until I told them that I was speaking French, and they're like, "Oh, okay, then it's worth your time. Then then you're okay. Then you're a good missionary.
Then it's
you're speaking
worthy.
a different language." Yeah, then it's worthy of, you know. So, but yeah, I've heard so many stories of friends of mine who served in the States, and they were asked, like, do they have worthiness issues? Like, why are they serving in the States? Are they incapable of going outside? And it's shocking. And there's no doctrinal, there's no foundation for that feeling except for the crusty corruption of the culture that all these people are, producing. It's just, there's no spiritual reason that should be happening. It's one of those things that should just go away.
I think it's all around the idea of the amount of celebration and hype around the mission call. So people have been, these huge opening parties. It's become like a gender reveal party, where they have these massive gatherings. They stream it so everyone can be there. They they get a globe, they get a map, and they're like, take your guess, where's this person going to go? Where are they going to serve? And everyone is like, well, maybe they'll serve here, maybe they'll serve here in, Kamchatka, or maybe in Johannesburg, or something really cool, and all that does is it shifts the focus of that entire missionary experience away from the fact that this teenager has actually met worthiness standards and is now eligible to serve as a representative of Jesus Christ for 2 years of their life. It's worthily
That's a shocking
doing
feat
it.
today.
It's like, man, that's huge. That's massive.
That's nearly impossible in today's world. So
that's being overshadowed by this huge, nasty, ugly shadow of just like, oh boy, let's get the doilies and the ribbons and the balloons and the party poppers and the streamers, and let's get the maps out. And if they read a stateside mission call, they are going to just absolutely regret it. You're going to see their facial expression fall. You'll see all of it, and it's really gross, and I don't like that. So,
well, that's because a lot of people who are culturally members, they don't see like the actual value of spreading the gospel. A lot of it is actually the excitement of going somewhere new, right? So, this whole idea of like some people, and I was part of this a little bit, like. It felt like, where's my 2-year vacation going to be? Where's my 2-year study abroad going to be? This is going to be fun,
right?
Because another thing I want to call out later is like how poorly missionaries were prepared in my day, at least, to go on missions. I was blindsided by a lot of the things I ended up having to do. I never thought I'd have to do on a mission.
Yeah,
but I think that a lot of kids, who are preparing for a mission, it's like, I want to study. I'm going to study abroad in this weird, perception of a mission. And if it's not somewhere exciting, it's going to be boring and it's not going to be fruitful. So that needs to stop. Yeah, that would be great if we could get rid of that.
Well, I know one girl who decided to serve a mission, and she decided to serve for all the wrong reasons. Like she treated it more like almost like a Facebook personality quiz. Do you remember those when Facebook first came out? And it was like, who's your Ninja Turtle? Is it going to be Donatello? Is it going to be Raphael? And all the questions are like obviously geared towards the turtle that you want to be or whatever, and so so like, anyway, she kind of treated it like that. She said, well, I might get married, but if I'm going to send in my papers, I'm going to do all the paperwork, I'm going to get completely ready, and if I don't get called outside of the country, then I am just going to stay here and get married. And I was just like, I was blown away. It was almost insulting. I'm like, you're going to waste the brethren's time with this just to make it a game. Like, how gross is that? Like,
there's so many people involved in that logistically. Like, that's wild. Even your bishop's time interviewing you and, the mission prep classes, like, that's a wild approach to it. I had never heard that
hideous. Before. Like, they treated it like some kind of a mood ring. They're like, oh, I got green. And she ended up getting called to like Indiana or something, and so like she ended up just saying like, no, I'm just gonna get married instead. So she turned down the call and got married, and I was just like, man, that is just not a good attitude to be approaching this with. I don't think that was what the brethren had in mind when they started rolling out mission calls to younger generations. I think they were like, they were hoping for a better class of missionary.
We all know the souls in Ohio are not nearly as valuable as the souls in, Prague, So,
well, Indiana. So,
Indiana, right. So is that where she ended up getting called, is Indiana?
That's where she ended up getting called. She ended up turning it down. She was just like, ew, gross. And so she ended up turning it down. I was like, oh, yeah, I don't think I'll be able to learn a language, or I won't be cool after that, or something like that. I won't have experience. And it's like, from my conversations with missionaries who serve stateside, they absolutely have some of the craziest experiences. Like, experiences aren't just a privilege of going to a foreign country. You might have some weird, crazy food, but you're still going to have weird, crazy food here. like you're going to have all kinds of crazy experiences that can happen in the United States.
Yeah, and honestly, like, I was barely foreign under, are you going foreign? That's the question they ask. And I barely qualified for that, so I got to be in the cool kid club for that. But I couldn't wait to get back to the States. I did not like being out of state. I don't like traveling at all, really. So I don't know. It's a very selfish thing to be so excited about, right? It's focused on the missionary who's supposed to be focusing on everyone else, on the selfless act that they're doing for 2 years. So
That's right.
the best way you can support your missionary is to not care where they're going and not make a big event out of it.
So what's your solution? So what should people be doing instead of the big parties that focus on the location and the big reading parties and stuff like that? What do you think is a better solution to that?
I mean, that's a good question. I don't even know, like, my solution to everything is like turn off the internet, like just throw phones away. That's the big solution, I think, for a lot of problems. But I don't think people are gonna, there's a good side to streaming that event because it's a meaningful event for someone that you love, supposedly, right?
Yeah.
So if you can emphasize the fact that they're going on a mission without placing inordinate value on where they're going, then that's the solution you need to. Just a minor correction is all, really.
Yeah.
Like celebrate that they're
maybe
serving
like
the
taking
Lord.
away like the cultural decorations of like the maps and the guessing games about the maps and stuff like that. Maybe take those away. And to the church's credit, I think the brethren lately, I think they've made the change to where now the mission call, back in my day, the location was like the second or third sentence in. Now it's, I think, like 2 or 3 paragraphs down. And the first 2 or 3 paragraphs are all talking about congratulations, and talking about the spiritual aspect of getting ready for a mission. So I think the church is there. I don't know that the culture is quite caught up to it yet. But what I would say is the recommendation there being, I would say, yeah, throw away the maps, throw away the guessing games, throw away all those games and statistics and anything around a mission call. Like, don't do it. You don't need to do it. You're only setting that missionary up for like a high stakes game because they can't control where they get called. If they get called stateside, they're only going to feel bad about themselves because of the culture. So just cut it out with the games. Just
for
quit.
Real. Like,
quit with the games.
Down. Make the location a footnote in the event, and just focus on it. It should be treated more like, when someone like is awarded a black belt in some form of martial arts or something. It is the accomplishment is getting called, right? Like, you are qualified to serve. You have met the standard. So focus on that, and then focus on the people they will be serving if you need to focus on something else other than the missionary. And the location is rather irrelevant.
I agree. We kind of have a theme to this episode today. So then we're going into our next segment, and I call it Consider the Path of Your Feet.
And now it's time to consider the path of your feet. For crying out loud.
We're going to get into some anti-videos that are going to get into unpacking their arguments and showing you kind of some of the breakdowns of what's going on there.
Like, more of a spiritual experience than I had ever.
Okay, so let me give you some background here. So this is a Mormon Stories podcast. For those of you who don't know, this is an member of the church podcast who is kind of branding themselves as like something straight out of the church, something that the church would produce. The host is this guy. He looks clean cut, clean shaven. He's got this, nice come over. You'd expect to bump into this guy at like Bowman's, or at like one of the at Harmon's somewhere, in the cheese aisle. This is the kind of guy we're dealing with there. Very, you look at this guy, it's like, yep, average kind of Utah guy there. So the context behind this video is that this gal went and saw Wicked, and apparently she said she had more of a spiritual experience and that it was more relevant spiritually for her than the temple. And I assume that she has left because this channel is just all about saints that have left the church and kind of their stories about that,
I think that's a safe assumption. Yeah.
So that's the context. So there you go. So now let's kind of dig into it.
Oh, by far. Like I said, that story, for some reason, has always meant so much to me. I love it so much. And the music and the friendship between those two characters. I don't know. I felt like I had done the same things that she had done. Like, I had gone.
Okay, quick disclaimer. I have not seen Wicked. That's not anything that I have ever done. So I think that out there
might complicate things a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know if you've seen it or not.
I've listened to it. I've listened to the whole score. I don't think I've seen. Oh, I might have seen it. I just don't remember. That's a good question. it was not seriously impactful to my life. I'll put it that way. I'm a huge Frank Baum fan. I believe that's his name, right? The writer of Wizard of Oz. Yeah, big fan of Wizard of Oz and all the books that he wrote after that. But yeah, in terms of Wicked, I'm not super familiar with it.
Okay, all right. Well, no harm, no foul. We'll just keep going.
Right.
I assume it's great, but
Probably
never
awesome.
gotten around to it.
To see the wizard, to like try like make this work, and discovered that he didn't have any power actually, and that the power and that I was searching for my whole life was me. It was inside of me. Yeah, and then the whole concept of then Elphaba gets painted as wicked because she learned the truth. That resonates as well, because I know what Mormons say about people who leave the church. Yeah, that you must have abandoned this thing because like you want to sin, you're a bad person, you don't care or whatever. And like, yeah, it was wild to like watch the Book of Mormon musical and then go see Wicked and find this whole new meaning in this story that I had loved my entire life.
We'll stop it there. So what are your initial reactions to that?
I mean, stories can relate to people. You know, if people can find meaning in almost every story, which is good. I'm glad that she found some meaning or some sort of connection, but I think is the wrong one for sure. There's a lot of like actual metaphor and things in the Oz stories that you can find that could really benefit your life. But the fact that she saw the temple as this big hoax, essentially comparing it to the wizard behind the curtain, I thought was really sad. I just feel like there's just no. I feel like 90% of members and ex-members are operating on a surface level understanding of what the temple has to offer. And that's just, it's heartbreaking.
Like there is so much power in the temple and from the covenants that you're able to make in that temple, that if you're getting out of it, if you're getting more from Wicked than from the temple, then that goes to show a handful of things. You know, it's like there's a lot to unpack with this story. It's not just simple, but I do agree with you. I do think that is a big part that a lot of people that end up leaving the church miss. I feel like the symbolism was completely lost on them. They drowned in the shallows. Like they completely just kind of died in the shallows on this one.
Like an ostrich trying to hide its head, you know, they just stick their head in the shallows and drown. I think that with what they misunderstand about the temple, and this is largely because they're not properly prepared for it, is that the temple is such an eternal thing. Like you can spend your entire life studying the meanings behind the actions and the words of the temple, and you'll only find it more and more fulfilling and enriching. The people who don't see any value in it just have not searched it out. Even for someone who has zero belief, if you did an avid study of the symbology of the temple, you'd have to be impressed. You'd have to have some level of respect for what goes on inside that building. So the fact that she goes through that experience and can, you know, akin it to Wicked, you know, which is something that you watch on a lazy afternoon when there's nothing else to watch. That's really sad. It's heartbreaking to see, really.
There are a couple of things that I took away from this. So if I were to put a title on her experience, I would call it A Tale of Two Temples. Okay? The first temple she went to, she had an experience, right? And I'm not sure if she went to Wicked before or after she left the church. I'm going to assume after, but for the sake of argument, let's just say before, right? So she goes to the temple, has an experience, goes out, you know, goes to Wicked, she sits down there, and then leaves Wicked with a lot of parallels in her life. And she has relationships to these characters because of the way that she feels and the way that they have portrayed her story. They've enacted her story on some level and in some degree on stage, and she has resonated with that, which I think that's fantastic. But I have to ask the question of like how much preparation went into her temple experience versus her Wicked experience, right? Her earthly temple experience. Like, and the amount of preparation is like you probably saw the original. You know, it's like
probably saw the play, yeah.
But not even that. She's pondering her experience afterward. So she had this experience. She's pondering it afterward. She's finding meaning. She's connecting to these characters. She's connecting to the symbolism within this man-made kind of temple ceremony. And it's like, that's part of your preparation as well for the temple. Because it shouldn't be just like a one and done thing. It should be something that you continue to go back. And so you should be reflecting. You should be contemplating things that you're seeing. You should be relating to these characters just like she's doing with this. And so to say like, yeah, I didn't really get anything out of the temple, it goes to show kind of a lack of temple prep. And so is that cultural? Is that on her end? I'm sure there are a lot of parts to play of that. It's like my temple prep experience was someone gave me a pamphlet. And they were like, my bishop gave me the pamphlet. He said, read this pamphlet, but don't get too caught up in the work. He's just look at the images, And so like I flipped through this thing. I looked at the images. I was just like, oh, cool. It's a pretty room, pretty buildings. Awesome. And then I went and I was just like, whoa, I had the same basic experience as everyone else. I was just like, didn't understand it. Absolutely not. Didn't understand anything. It's so much. But the more that I put in time and effort to try and understand it and to read books, so there's like this great book, Who Shall Ascend by LeGrand Baker, amazing book that talks about the ancient Israelite temple ceremony. The more that I understand it, the more power I'm able to get from it. And that's an actual power that helps me in my daily life to move the mountains that are in front of me. And so it's like, it's really sad to see that she was more prepared for her wicked experience than she was for her temple experience, and I'm sure there are a lot of people to blame for that, but at some level, you have to take some personal responsibility for that. You can't just say like, oh, leaders didn't prepare me for that. I mean, my leaders didn't, I didn't prepare myself, but as I've continued to go to the temple, it's become a rich experience because I have taken that temple prep on myself.
Yeah, well, I remember, and this is on me, when I was young, like I wasn't like actively interested in the insides of the temple. The phrase is to go through the temple, right? So like as a young adult getting ready for a mission, it's a like a hurdle almost to some, it's like, oh, I just got to go through the temple, then I can go do all the things I want to do. Great,
Yeah.
But did I actively study to the degree the covenants I would make in the temple? No, I failed to do that. And so that's when some things caught me off guard when I went in. And, there were some leaders who said, hey, you should probably prepare for the temple. So like prep is, I don't know, it feels like it's people are infamously underprepared for the temple. That's a problem of our generation.
I mean, our grandpa left the church right after going through the temple. It scared him so bad, he left the church. Obviously, there's probably a lot of cultural rot to his testimony at that point, Probably was already on the edges, but that pushed him over the line. He was like, I'm done. He threw his garments in the trash and never went back to church after that,
I think that some people just don't understand that, one, when we say you're making covenants in the temple, you are actually going to be making commitments. You're going to choose to make those commitments in the temple. That's an active choice you have to make. And then two, like it's okay to not understand everything. Like I don't feel like that's said enough as like, hey, it's okay not to understand this. You're going to be held to the degree of the knowledge that you have and the understanding that you have, and nothing less, right?
Well, it's a covenantal relationship. So you look at the other covenantal relationship in your life of like marriage. Are you telling me that before you got married, you knew exactly what was going to happen in your marriage and you knew exactly what you were getting yourself into? Like, that's crazy. This is another covenantal relationship. It's just like, yeah, it's the same idea there. It's like the longer that you stick with them, the more that you yoke yourself with this relationship, the more you're going to understand and the more you're going to get out of it. But the more sacrifice you put into it, the more you're going to get it. You reap what you sow, basically. And so like, if you don't put any effort into a covenantal relationship, you're not going to get anything back. Just like with a marriage. Like if you put nothing in, you're not going to get anything out. You're probably going to get some divorce papers pretty quick. But I mean, look at the idea that came at the very end of this video. She came to a conclusion, which is really cool because it's like she's making my point for me here. So she came to the conclusion that she was the power that she needed. Like everything she needed was within herself. So for all intents and purposes, like she is her own God. to herself. She was like, all right, I am the morning and the evening star at this point. And basically, I look at that and I think to myself, she had the inverse, almost word for word, inverse experience as Moses when he went to the top of Mount Sinai and had that temple experience with God, where God showed him everything. He showed him all creation on earth. He walked away from that, and the scripture says that he realized that man was nothing, which thing he had never considered before. And so she walked away with the completely, she entered the worldly temple and came out with a worldly understanding of like, I am my God. Man is my God. I'm going to put my trust in man because they can help me. Now, what kind of an attitude is that to have? What kind of a behavior? So let's consider the pathway of your feet, right? Where is that going to get you in a marriage or with kids or in society? If it's like, I am all I need. I'm the big cheese on campus, and it's up to me to solve all my problems. Because, I think at a certain point, you can't live with that worldview. It's too selfish. The world does not revolve around you, and adulthood will slap you upside the head repeatedly until you learn that lesson. And everyone who's had a wife and kids is going to know that as well.
100%. If you believe that you're the only person you need, then everything else around you becomes superfluous. And by dint of that, meaning like you don't have to commit as much as you do. Like, I have all I need right now, so everything else I'm extending out to is not nearly as important as what I have inside, which is just not true. Like, you need your wife or your spouse, you need your children, you need God. These people are, you're nothing, just like Moses felt. Like you're just nothing. And that's not something you hear a lot nowadays because people are having self-esteem issues, and that's tough, right?
Yeah.
People don't want to be told that they're nothing, but all the greatest thinkers of humanity over the last few thousand years have come to that same conclusion that, wow, we are nothing, right? And it's our dependence on a higher being, it's dependence on our God that makes us something. And it's also funny that she believes that she can be everything that she needs to satisfy, like her persona, because, to become her own God. That's something that to a level we agree with, like that one day, under the right circumstances, you can achieve something of that nature to a certain degree, right? The lens is a little skewed on that, but a little minor correction, and she could jump right back on track.
Yeah. So now the interesting thing to me about all of this is that she's going to hit a point in her life when she realizes that she's not enough, and she's going to realize that like there is something that she cannot control, and it's like nobody is immune to trials. No one's immune to really hard times. And so she's going to hit a point in her life when that happens. And there's this really great painting. It's in the Smithsonian. Let me pull it up if I can. All right. So this is basically, it's a series of painting. This is one of the series in this painting. I believe the painting series is called The Voyage of Life. This phase of the painting is called manhood. And it goes through like childhood, young adulthood, manhood, and then old age. And it shows it shows a couple different elements in every single one of the paintings. And the main elements that it shows is you've got your protagonist, so the main character going through different stages of life. And I believe life is symbolized by the water. Life is chaotic, it's unpredictable, and that's how water is. Now, when you're a child, you see it's smooth, it's easy. Young adulthood, you're starting to get a little wave here or there, but it's exciting. The skies are blue, everything's great. Manhood is the one that I represent, that I resonate with the most, because the skies are completely dark. There are rocks all over the place, just jagged rocks, rough waters, harsh currents.
Yeah.
And you see this man here on the boat can't steer it, right? It's like there's nothing to steer it. He has no control over this boat whatsoever. And so the other piece that I left out in all of these paintings is there's an angel. There's a divine presence in every single one of these paintings. And when he's a boy, all the way up until manhood, the divine presence is behind them. And the older that he gets, the further and further away that presence becomes. And so you don't really see it until manhood, but manhood is when he's seeing these rocks. He's seeing this terrible, awful, nasty landscape in front of him. He knows he's about to die. He begins praying. And so that's where you see kind of like this divine opening portal above him that's saying, okay, God is aware of him and he's going to make sure that he gets out of this safely, you know? And it's my belief and experience that every person on this earth is going to go through some version of that, where they hit rocky waters, where they hit a rough patch in their life, and where they hit some place where they realize they're not enough, like that they have to rely on something else outside of themselves. And if you don't have that, you're toast. And hey, this is silly, you know, like we have science and we have academia and we have everything, you know, and it's like, well, okay, we've got more scientists, we've got more therapists, we've got more medications, shots, vaccines than ever before, and yet we have the highest rates of mental illness ever recorded in the country, and sickness. And it's like, don't you think? So there's like almost there's a graph, right? So church attendance is on the decline. It's a negative slope. And then you see mental illness is a positive slope, and they crisscross, you know? And I'm like, I don't want to be the correlation causation guy here, but I'll just leave it at that. Okay.
But yeah, I think to that point, like we are more mentally ill than we've ever been before. And I feel like you're right. Like there's this like general reliance on whatever science is, right? Like the latest study or anything like that. But I don't think people actually use it in an active pursuit of science or furthering knowledge. I think our generation largely uses it as an opportunity to turn off their brain. But I think people are just not thinking. Like people don't want to think about what happens after you die. They don't want to know if God is there or if he's not. There is a state of numbness that you can achieve with ease, with the right amount of dopamine from your phone or from the TV that can numb you to complete oblivion, and you can operate for decades on that plane. Like Hannah, she's a beekeeper, and I go with her every now and then, and watching the smoke fall upon the bees and watching them fall into that completely placid state where they're harmless, they can barely move, they're just smoked out of their minds, right? Like that's our entire generation. That's this entire group of people that just don't want to think about religion, don't want to think about the hard path, the rapids that are quickly, you know, coming down on them,
right?
As they're sitting in their little boat, you know.
Like it's much easier to just get lost in the smoke of TikTok and Instagram and social media and just kind of numb out to everything else. I mean, and I'm gonna disagree a little bit. I don't think people have a problem with so I don't think it's that people are not thinking. I think it's a problem of people are thinking too much and feeling too little. I feel like people, because science has kind of done away with this idea of the spiritual realm, right? And so they've set themselves up as like, well, you know, we've got, you know, therapy and we've got all this medication and stuff like that. And I'm not saying that there's no place for that in society. But I would like to point out that as religion, which is something that has known to bring like fruits of the spirit, you know, like peace, joy, happiness, patience, long-suffering, things like that, brotherly kindness, all of those are side effects of the spirit. As church attendance and religion has been on the decline, we've seen a decline in all of those fruits of the spirit with people. And so it's because people are just like worried about this chemical reaction going on in their mind. They're all like, oh, well, what about the chemicals in my mind? I need more of this and I need more of that. And I'll go to the store and I can buy my way out of this. And I don't think you can. You can't, you know, like you can spend a lot of money, you know, you can waste a ton of money on that kind of stuff, but it's not something that you can buy with money. It's something that you pay for in sacrifice, that you pay for in active conscientious study, you know, and searching and pondering and figuring things out. To your point, we are surrounded by the smoke of all of these social media platforms that are constantly invading our thoughts and making us think too much. And I feel like it's getting us away from feeling. And I think maybe that's why older generations, like the pioneers, they had plenty of time to ponder. They had plenty of time to think without distraction because they didn't have like instantaneous messaging. They didn't have cars or anything like that. They were always like on the road or traveling, walking, things like that. And that's why they were able to ponder things and feel if they were true or not. And a lot of people have been disconnected. They've lobotomized themselves from that part of them. And you can't do that without consequences.
Right. Yeah. Well, to my point, like that, if I were to if I were to mock up a fake article and the headline says science, expert scientists discovered that there is no soul. Like, how many people could you send that to who would read that and be like, oh, I guess there's no soul? And just like, boom, that just becomes a fact in their mind.
Right.
I can think of a handful of people I could send that right now. Be like, oh, yeah, guess we were all just goofing off and, guess that was a total lie that we just all accepted. Now there's no soul.
It sounds like an article from the Babylon Bee, but yeah, no, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, well, 100%. Like, I think people would read that and rely on the experts to do all the thinking for them on that front, and then just accept the fact that there is no soul. But to your point, like the constant distraction, which keeps our brain running, but in a million different directions instead of actually pondering upon something important. Yeah, I totally agree with that. That's, your mind is like back to the beehive motif. Your mind is like a buzzing hive at that point. And it's tempting. Like, there are times I'll sit down, I'll just look at my phone and be like, man, let me just reel through Instagram for a bit, let me just get mad at strangers for a while. It's one of my favorite pastimes, just get mad at strangers.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful of that kind of stuff, because what that'll do is that'll remove from your life time where you could be connecting your soul to God. Right.
Yeah. It was Isaiah that said, like, speaking about our day, he said, their land is full of idols. They worship things that they made with their own fingers, It's like, absolutely. You see the amount of people that are just like glued to their phones 24/7 that just won't put them down and stuff like that. It's just like, yeah, there are a handful of idols. There's so many out there. I get it. Yeah. It's hard, but you can't really say that you can't put this on the church. You can't put this on God. You can't put this on really anyone else. And it's unfair to try and say like, well, this is the church, and their failure and blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, there's the church has such a loaded hand against it. Like, there are so many forces out there that are against Christianity in general, that I don't think that's fair. But I mean, and I don't have a problem with this young woman. I think she's really young, and I think she's making these decisions because they're popular, and that's what mainstream outlets are telling her to do. It's just like, get out there, find your truth. You be you. I mean, even Disney's telling her to that, no right, no wrong, no rules for you. Go out there and be yourself, Life is a Disney musical.
I mean, and, call back to the rotting culture of the church. I think that, that has permeated into the church quite a lot, actually. I think a lot of that little stuff has permeated in there with the whole, like, speak your truth things. Your truth, this possessive of the truth, right? Like, who's, there's your truth, there's my truth. No, there's just the truth, right? There's this, what's really happening and the truth about it. So yeah, I don't fault her at all for just kind of navigating within the narrow scope of her experience. I just wish she would, open up that scope a little bit, dive a little bit deeper into the actions that she's been taking, and realize that, yeah, she's in, take account of your surroundings and realize what you're actually participating in next time you go to the temple, and just kind of invest a little bit in that, and you might find it a lot more worth your while.
Yeah, if I were to lay blame on anyone or anything like that, I think the nasty part about this is the guy. I don't know what his name is, the owner of Mormon Stories, that guy, just like a dirtbag of a guy, right? So this is a gal who has just cut off her oxygen supply spiritually. And this guy is telling her, yes, you've done something good. Great. Good for you. Yes. He's giving her no other alternative. He's not sending her to another denomination. He's just saying like, hey, good job for you. Go out there and have fun. He's giving her like a pat on the back as she's like going to Pleasure Island. And knowing full well that like, yeah, she probably will end up, somewhere along the way needing God in her life and not being able to find him, and I'm not doing anything to stop that. I'm giving her a pat on the back and a thumbs up. And it's great for me because I get a profit off of the views that her content generates for me. It's really disgusting. I think that's a horrible, nasty thing to do.
It's so gross. And yeah, that really bothers me when people do that, because there are some things wrong with the culture of the church, which is an outgrowth of the church, right? Like it happens with every institution. There's going to be some kind of corruption, some kind of, curling of the edges around it, which is, you have to learn to kind of fight the cultural traditions of the church while maintaining the gospel provided traditions of the church, right? And a lot of people, they misunderstand, or they have a negative experience, and instead of just trimming that tree of tradition, they chop the whole thing down.
They just say toss it.
Oh yeah,
forget about it. Yeah,
done. I'm gonna go do whatever I want now, just because why not? Yeah. And that's when you find out that they had no real moral understanding of what they actually believed in. They didn't actually believe in anything. The people who leave the church and then go indulge in all the things that the church said that you probably shouldn't indulge in didn't have a moral structure outside of what the church provided. And you need that as an individual. You should have a solid understanding of what is right.
Not only as an individual, societies need that. Like communities need that. Like the thing is, like we're not alone when we say that the destruction of the family is going to lead to the destruction of the country. And so like this guy, by kind of affirming her in her state of saying, like, in this kind of younger state of saying, like, yeah, good, maybe I saw some TikToks and they convinced me that this isn't the path for me, and she's going out there, she's exploring something, she's learning. Back in the day, you could do that on your own, and you didn't have people that were just like an instant community around you telling you, like, yeah, go do that. Do you think those people are going to be there for her when crap hits the fan? When she falls upon hard times, as everybody will. Do you think this guy's going to be there saying, like, hey, I'm going to be there for you, I'm going to support you? Because the content that I've seen so far seems to flow by Cain's mantra of, I am not my brother's keeper. I don't care what happens to this gal. I don't care. It's like the church is all about ministering. It's all about, like, hey, connect not only to yourself, with your family, with your neighbors, with your community, but also to your ancestors and to your future posterity. Like, it's not just about you. I feel like Doc from Back to the Future. You're not thinking fourth dimensionally. It's like,
for real.
Like, just to think about it, it's like if you are the morning and the evening star, you've adopted this very selfish ancient ideology of, like, I'm going to live for me. It's like, do you think that's going to lead to a healthy, happy, fruitful marriage and a healthy, happy, fruitful posterity? Or do you think that's going to lead to probably divorce? And do you think that's probably going to lead to broken homes and maybe upset children, upset childhoods, and bad experiences going down the lane, or children at all? It's like she might just, like, destroy the link that her ancestors fought, bled, sweat, worked, and died for. All in one fell swoop.
Oh yeah, and it all comes with it comes by the subtle poison of low expectations, right? The phrase "you do you" has done more damage than I think a lot of any other phrases in modern day history. This kind of mainstream mentality where, like, if you value someone, you'll have low expectations of them, right?
Right.
You will say, you do whatever you want. I'm not going to expect anything of you because that would be rude and odious, and I don't want to, like, burden you with expectations, right?
Yeah.
You can't have a functional relationship with that. So you get a lot of, like, sideways approval when people, they're not dissenting with what you're doing. Sometimes they're not consenting and they're not condoning it. So you get to live in this fantasy land where you do whatever you want. There's virtually no social consequences until crap hits the fan and there's no one there to catch you, right? Because you burned all those bridges very slowly, right?
Absolutely.
So I hope the best for her. That's people got to go through their own journeys. They got to learn, and the movie theater is it's very similar to the temple in some ways. I think it was Mike Day who has an interesting parallel between the modern day movie theater being the secular temple, right?
Well, I mean, the temple is a drama. You know, it's like, it's like drama has been a part of worship for centuries. You know, it's like that's just part of who we are as a people.
Yeah,
I've had spiritual experiences watching movies. You know, like I saw Lord of the Rings. Boy, man, that was great.
That was great. Yeah, and how many times did you go to the movie theater to watch those? You know?
Oh yeah.
If you went to the temple as often as you went to the movies, you would have ascended already.
Yeah. So. Moving to our next segment here, we're getting into mission stories. All right. So I don't just want to bag on people. I want to kind of give them something that they can kind of take away that's a little bit uplifting. And I feel like every missionary that goes out there and is trying to be a good missionary, not the ones that went out there because the dad said they're going to give them a car or whatever. You know, it's like the ones that went out there and actually tried to give a crap. You know, it's like they had great experiences, and I feel like a lot of times they just get lost in the journals, you know, or they just get left behind. I think it's a great and noble cause to just bring those out and to kind of share them, because I think they can do a lot of good with people.
And now, Tales from the Mission.
Let me start. So, it was in an area. So this was right before I got transferred into this area. Okay. There was this investigator that we had. His name was Tito, and he was a part of the Paraguayan mafia. If you're wondering, yes, Paraguay apparently does have a mafia. I had no idea at the time. So this guy, he had done a lot of really bad things. Murder was on his list, absolutely. And like we were working with him for a while because like we're like, okay, we're gonna have to work through this at some point. But here's the deal: the way that Tito got involved with the missionaries right before I got transferred into the area, he was at an incredibly low point in his life. He was completely depressed out of his mind. He was just like, I'm done. I've hit rock bottom. I'm not going anywhere else. So he snorted 2 lines of cocaine. He grabbed a gun. He loaded it, and he said a prayer. He said, all right. He said, God, please, if you're there, please stop this, you know? And then he put the gun to his head and he pulled the trigger. So the gun didn't fire. So the trigger, he pulled the trigger, it misfired. And then as soon as it misfired, immediately after it didn't go off, the missionaries came to his door. And so he opened his door and they were like, hey, we want to talk to you about Jesus Christ. Do you have a minute? And he was like, yeah. Yeah. And he was a little dumbfounded. And the really cool thing, and I'll put this in afterward, he actually gave me the bullet. And the bullet actually has a dent in the back, like on the firing pin. There's actually a dent where it actually should have gone off. I don't know what kind of gun it was. I'm not that big of a gun guy, but from my experience with guns is that like if there's a dent back there, there should have been some kind of explosion, you know? And so
absolutely, it
was really cool to see that. And did Tito end up getting baptized or anything like that? No, but did he learn that God cared about him? Absolutely. Like this guy who had done some of the worst things imaginable, God cared about him. And that was a really, really powerful moment for me on my mission that I think a lot of people could benefit from hearing.
Absolutely. That's crazy. So there's a dent. So it did it not hit the pin in the bullet, or like, I don't know. That's wild.
No idea.
That's wow. What a story.
Yeah.
The story I had in mind does not compare.
Sorry, I didn't mean to set you up like
yeah, just follow that. Holy cow. Yeah. I was in this apartment building, and we like to play this game called Dodge the Landlord, you know, because someone would call the maintenance guy or the landlord of the whole building.
Yeah.
And we, once they do, we'd mark the level that they're at, and we had to roll the dice. We had to know, like, all right, should we go up? Should we go down? Which way is the landlord going to come up, right? So at that point, we would start sporadically choosing levels to go to, right? So he'd have to check every single floor. And then we'd wait in the hallway until he's checked one, and then we'll go back into that one, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, a little bit of spiritual hide and seek. So in efforts to avoid this landlord, we went to a level that we wouldn't normally have had time to reach that day. And we went and knocked on this door. And when we knocked on the door, the woman opened it, but she was too busy sobbing to talk to us. And she was on the phone with somebody, and then she'd realized that she had just been called and notified that her son had passed away. Like, as she was, right before she opened the door, she had answered the phone. Someone had told her that her son has passed away, and she opened the door when that happened.
Wow.
So she's bursting into tears. We, of course, didn't have anything to say, but that we loved her and that we were trying to, we knelt down with her at that moment and prayed with her and gave her a hug and just tried to help her through that experience. I don't think she even knew what church we were from, to be honest. Like, I don't think she caught that.
Yeah.
She was far too concerned about the tragic thing that just happened to her. But I think it was honestly more for my companion and I, and me to experience than for her. It was great to be there for her in that time of comfort. And it shocked me to my core of like how things happen, right? Like the
eternal timetable. Yeah.
The cosmic timing of it all just baffled me. Because I heard the phone ringing when we were walking down the hall. Like the walls were thin, right?
Yeah.
And I knocked on the door feeling like she wasn't even going to answer because I heard her answering the phone, right?
And this was Montreal, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I got you.
So it's she was actually, I believe she was Haitian. She was a Haitian immigrant. Yeah, so it just shocked me that those series of events lined up where we're just goofing off trying to dodge a landlord and trying to knock as many doors as we could, all of a sudden to be thrust into a serious situation and to be mentally and spiritually prepared as a missionary to support that woman in her lowest moment.
Yeah.
That was something precious to me. And that's something, to harken back to the beginning of our episode here, that's something that can happen anywhere, even in Indiana, right? That's something that I will never forget, and the location of that just doesn't matter.
Exactly. Like it happens, like tragedy strikes everywhere. It's not exclusive to foreign countries, And so that's really
exactly.
Cool. Yeah. So to kind of wrap everything up, we'll finalize with just like a little bit of come follow me in the culture, right?
And now it's time for This Week in Come Follow Me.
Last week, we learned about the Jaredites, and I was actually thinking a lot about the Jaredites because in the Book of Ether, we read that the Jaredites, they built these barges. They look at the ocean, and I just kept thinking to myself, like, what gave these guys the spunk and the moxie to look at that huge ocean filled with sea monsters, mountainous waves, and to look at their barges, which didn't have any steering, no sails, or anything like that, and to say that I'm going to get in those, and I'm going to a promised land that's somewhere out there. They didn't have maps. There was no Google Maps. There was nothing. It was just like, all right, somewhere out there is my promised land, and I'm going to find it. Like, what gave them the moxie and the spunk and the chutzpah to do that? And as I thought about it, an idea came. And the idea was that, you ready for this? Celestial beings don't have to play by telestial rules. And so...
Oh, that's interesting.
So the thing is that I learned was that if you are living... So life is like a game, right? And the thing that the church has opened my eyes to is that there are different levels that you can play the game at. And that if the Jaredites were playing a telestial game, they would have come to the ocean, they would have seen all of those obstacles in their way, and they would have been like, game over, I'm done. There's no way I can make it across there. I'm done. Fear is now my ruler. Fear, doubt, anxiety. Those are my masters. I don't get to make it to that promised land. I'll just have to try somewhere else. This was a fool's errand. I'm an idiot, right? So that's the telestial attitude there, the telestial rule. But the thing is, if you are living a celestial, if you're playing the game by celestial rules, you get access to celestial power, which means that if you're faced with an ocean, that you will either light up your barges, you will build a ship, sail on an ark, or split the sea to get to your promised land. And that is power that you're able to have. You've got power in your corner. You've got actual power that can help get you where you need to go, to help move your mountains, to help split those seas and get you safely through. And that's something that telestial beings and playing on telestial planes of existence will never get you.
That's interesting. You know, when you started talking, I thought you were going to liken that mentality to the same one that I have sometimes, where I look at things that shouldn't be able to fit in the van and be like, we can make it fit. And my wife looks at me like I'm crazy. You know,
right.
You know, that typical man state of like, yeah, we could do that.
It's gonna work. Yeah.
You know, like it'll probably be fine. But no, I like your explanation a lot better. Yeah, I think that having access to celestial power is definitely something that everyone can have, but it requires a level of energy to shift your mentality into that state and to maintain it, which one would call faith, right? That very few people can exercise in their current state. That requires constant practice. And if you can do that, then yeah, you can almost see that celestial plane that you can operate in if you have access to that faith in that mental power, right? Yeah. Which, you know, like if I was in that same situation, it would take, you know, it would take a visitation from Christ himself to get me to believe that he could cross the ocean in a, you know, something that's tight like onto a dish, right?
Right.
Which probably didn't hurt, the fact that they did, right?
Didn't hurt at all.
That's probably helpful. Yeah,
but I mean, I look at that, I contrast it with like Nephi's story, where you had half the family that was trying to play the game by celestial laws, and the other half was trying to play by telestial laws. And they had so much more of a rough time, especially on the seas. Like when the telestial laws took over, life was terrible, and it looked like they were going to die, you know? And so it wasn't until they started playing by celestial laws that they were actually able to make it to their promised land. And so to like bring this back to the culture and things like that, these are things that you're able to learn in the temple. This is the takeaway, that's the power that you're able to take home from the temple. That's the power that you're able to bring into your circumstances. The Jaredites were singing praises. They were happy when they were buried by these mountainous waves. Like they were literally buried in the sea, buffeted by sea monsters, and they were still singing praises. They had a great time, much better time than Nephi did. And it's because they understood that, like, if you play celestial games, you win celestial prizes. And so that's the big
Put that
takeaway.
On a t-shirt. Yeah, that's great.
And so
I think that's a great takeaway.
Yeah, so you look at like to you know, make it a little less slippery. If you're looking at maybe some financial hardships, if you're looking at like broken relationships, crippling health conditions, or something like that, you know, and you're filled with fear and you're racked with like anxiety, depression, you are maybe you're on a hard time, or something is going on right now that's really difficult in your life. That's your ocean. And the thing that you can take from the Jaredites is that happiness and that attitude, and saying, okay, as long as I am within my celestial, if I'm playing the game by celestial rules, then I'm going to get celestial help. And I'm going to get celestial prizes to help me through this. It might be that you're filled with the motivation to keep going. You know, it might be that a miracle comes, you know, maybe you'll be able to walk on the water, for crying out loud, you know?
Right.
Or maybe it's a change of circumstances. Maybe it's a change in your attitude. Maybe it's a change in something, you know, but you have access to that when you are playing by celestial rules. And that's something that you don't have when you're not.
100%. Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Okay. Well, I think that's just about it.